Welcome to Solitaire Interglobal's QuickByte seminar, Customer Experience Focus on the Mainframe, where overall experience is seen as an indication of IT platform quality. Solitaire Interglobal Limited was established in 1978. It maintains its world headquarters in Elgin, Illinois in the U.S. Solitaire has been involved with the establishment of industrial standards and performance certification for several decades, and conducts active information gathering for the Operational Characterization Master Study, OPMS. Solitaire currently runs over 200,000 models annually in support of both ongoing subscription customers and ad hoc inquiries. Solitaire is an expert service provider. We maintain a massive and ever-growing heuristic database of real-world customer production data. That database is currently 160 petabytes and growing. In the last 3 years, we've conducted over 31,000 new technology impact assessments, and we've client-reported savings of over $2.04 billion on those implementations and projects in the same time period. Solitaire is involved in understanding and analyzing customer experience in the marketplace. With mobile computing on the rise, you see a growing set and growing level of customer expectations. This presents IT with new and very complex challenges. And some of those challenges relate to scaling to meet demand, how to handle activity surges, the whole big messy area of security, and the target of consistent response time. Customer experience, or CX, establishes market share, and it tends to build customer loyalty. It's built painstakingly over time and is easy to lose in a heartbeat. Customer experience is really all about perception. The end user customer experience reflects the underlying IT platform only indirectly. There is no direct visibility by the end user or customer. And the underlying platform affects the customer experience by supporting and enabling the applications that run on it. So, in order to quantify and understand this, Solitaire's metric combines two perspectives. It combines objective and subjective. The objective form looks at the IT platform and application and the characteristics that are associated with that. The subjective side looks at the meeting of expectations, both implicit and explicit. Implicit expectations are set by culture, general market delivery, and a whole series of sort of usual background objectives. Explicits are promises for performance and visibility, and they take usually the form of some form of guarantee. Now, we find a lot of those published on websites, and we find a lot of them in marketing literature, whether it's commercials or advertising, web, etc. The end user perception itself is affected by many factors. You have a cultural background, and you also have the perception tied to how well the organization matches the customer's priorities of what's important. You have speed of response as a core component, and you have consistency of response as sort of a subconscious component to this. You have the messaging, how the organization talks to the customer and how they communicate with them on many levels. And that end user to organization communication tends to be critical. First of all, you have to understand, is it possible? Can the end user talk to the organization, and can the organization talk to the end user? And also, is it trackable? Does the organization make sure that it knows when it's talked to a specific customer? And does the customer have the data and the information necessary to say, I talked to you on such and such a time, or I sent you an email on such and such a date about this subject? The organizational communication has many dimensions. First of all, it has to communicate how important the end user is to the organization. It has to support the view of the customer as an individual, and it has to demonstrate the flexibility to provide individualized responses to that end user, not just bland form letters, but things that really say, we know who you are, we know what you care about, and we care about you. Part of the complexity of customer experience is that it's a layered system. Okay, you have three main layers. You have the most visible one, which is the applications and data layer. This is where your customers interact with the organization and is very visible. It has not only the applications and the targeted data that are involved in that application, but it's also supported by the generally available data in the organizational's data vault. The second layer that is not as visible but has some visibility is the overall operations. Now, operations consist of conditions, controls, and rules. This layer is more obscured from the customer, but you still see its presence in things like the hours of operation and when downtime is, when people can buy things at a store. I mean, I've been online at 3 in the morning and decided I wanted to go buy something. And when that's not available, I feel like somehow that organization has failed me. And I'm not alone in that feeling. The bottom layer, the one that's least visible to the customers, is the IT infrastructure. It's very difficult for customers to directly attribute their experience to the infrastructure. They have no idea what sort of storage, what sort of processor, what sort of middleware, routers, etc. are underneath. All they know is, does it work? Does it work the way I want it? And do I feel like it's meeting my needs? When we look at the composite effect of all the layers, we see that um, it's really viewed by the end user as a whole. They don't look at the different pieces. Each layer affects the others, and we have varying degree of customer involvement in any of those layers. We have a varying split between staffing, the user percentages, visibility, and so on, but it looks like one entity to the customer, and that's how they report their customer experience. Customer experience does have a significant impact on revenue. In a new implementation, if there is a negative customer experience at the beginning, it's very hard to regain lost ground. You can see here on the chart that we're looking at post-deployment monthly revenue, and we're looking at how much it varied by their expected revenue for the initial month, and then after that we're looking at the relative change in revenue. Normally, if a customer experience is good, you see a rise month after month till it levels off at some degree. When there's a negative customer experience, then that revenue drops below expectations and it never really catches up. So not only do you have to have good customer experience at the start, but you need to invest a significant amount of care and tending in order to grow and maintain that customer loyalty, that customer base. At the beginning, establishing customer loyalty is difficult. It's very fragile. It's very ephemeral to start. As you broaden out the base, as the customer has more things to interact with in the organization, then it becomes less volatile and less fragile. One of the main areas that customer experience highlights is security. And security exposure is important to both the virtual and the physical marketplaces. It's important to understand that it is difficult to decouple virtual and physical marketplaces. Whether the customer is involved with an organization online or at a physical location, they still interact with your applications. And especially in the physical marketplace, you have a lot of composite systems. Those composite systems may have one type of infrastructure at the point of sale and another at the back-end processing. These composite systems further cover up the view of individual platforms. Now, the security exposure is a frequent discussion on the web and in the news. We see headlines pretty much every day showing this security violation, this security incursion, etc. The headlines show the magnitude, but they really understate the problems. Security exposure if we just look at it by incursions, by the actual violations, the thefts, and so on, 18.21% of the incursions for 2014 have occurred in the virtual marketplace. 81.79 have occurred in the physical. So it's not online that has the biggest exposure, it's physical. Social media also affects computer experience for customers. It magnifies the problems because the news of problems get around faster. It's like gossip. Gossip in a small village goes from 0 to 1,000 miles per hour in very short time. With the advent of social media, that small village is our world. It also tends to intensify the reaction. So where a small amount of reaction would be happening in a localized environment, the social media means that it's a bigger audience, a bigger stage for those reactions to play out on. And it also has a very unfortunate side effect that it spawns imitators. So a breach in one area that's highly publicized will quickly have others that are trying to breach other organizations in a similar manner. The cost of security is amazing, frightening and amazing. From a customer experience perspective, it is one of the most stated worries about customers working online and now on physical stores. Solitaire, to understand this, accumulated costs from literally millions of customer reports. We found that the reports are understated because the initial reporting view is that of immediacies. Long-term effects are significantly larger than what organizations report at the beginning. The numbers that we got in 2011, looking at those numbers for this last year, are over 143% more than the initial report was. 2012 is even higher variant with a 218% overage from the initial reports. Part of this is due to the market. Part of it is due to the intensity of security breaches. Part of it is due to the scope of those breaches. So the physical market does hold the majority of that loss, which is 81.79% for the current year. To put that in perspective, looking at the market loss in US dollars, and this is a worldwide number, but we translated it all into US dollars in order to get a sort of an even playing field. In the virtual market, vendors have paid out 1.02 billion. End user auditable cost is 0.03 billion. On the physical side, vendors have paid out 49.60 billion and end users have paid out 9.47 billion. Those are immediacy views. Those are not the long-term effects. That's not market loss. Customer experience does have platform synergy. Understanding it and quantifying it can be very difficult. First of all, customer experience is a reflective metric. It's subjective and it builds on a subjective perception of objective factors. Getting a specific correlation is difficult and can only be done by huge massive data and lots of analysis. If we look at the CX correlation to the IT infrastructure, we find that there are things that we can identify, we can tie to. Those four are the speed of response, the consistency of response, the end user to organization communications, and security. Now, Solitaire has looked at customer experience as an overall perspective, and we broke it down by multiple platform architectures. This discussion is the first one, and we're looking at the mainframe focus. We will be discussing other platforms in later QuickByte webinars in the following weeks. So we wanted to understand the correlation of what the platform brings and identify the important characteristics of each platform. Looking at the mainframe, we see first from a customer satisfaction perspective. The end user has reported a fair amount of reaction to systems that when we did the analysis we found were hosted on a mainframe. The mainframe hosted applications show a higher end user and customer satisfaction ratings by as much as 138.71% over the other options. And since satisfaction is the ultimate metric, this is a fairly important correlation. Now, we did look at both subjective and objective components. Part of this is that customer satisfaction is a perception of success. But we do see that the mainframe advantage is substantial, even though the actual platform is invisible to the end user. One of the main components to the customer satisfaction that was reported was response time. Overall, the mainframe hosted applications show a faster response time by as much as 2.8 times those hosted on other architectures. And since this is a major contributor to satisfaction, and since expectations are set by general overall market response time, this provides the mainframe with a fair amount of advantage. It's important to look at consistency of response also, because human beings notice variance in response at about 12%. And this is backed by exhaustive studies over many, many years in many locations, cultures, and countries. We looked at the variation, both positive and negative, for this metric, and the absolute variant for the mainframe was 3.2%. In other words, it was not discernible. Other platform architectures went up to as much as 143.2%, which is way past noticeable. It's at the point where you say, I'm not going to work on this website, I'll go to somebody else. It is important to know that any noticeable variance lowers the customer experience rating, even if it is sometimes you're faster. It's just the inconsistency causes less satisfaction. Availability and unavailability, which are sort of the flip sides of the same metric, are also important when we're looking at customer experience. We found that applications hosted on non-mainframe platforms have increased unavailability by up to 6.4 times that of mainframe hosted applications. And so unavailable applications don't make money, nor do they please customers. Availability, and here we're talking application availability, can be affected by many factors. You have planned and unplanned outages, you have the reliability in aggregation for each component, and you have components of implementation quality and effectiveness. Some of the things that we found during the analysis about what determines availability is we saw that if you have a limited need to reboot the full platform, or if you have a lower number of system patches and updates required, and if you have a responsive technical support group, then your availability increases and your unavailability becomes much smaller. In this area, the mainframe has a distinct advantage for all of those reasons. Another important area when looking at customer experience is we have risk. And risk in this case is the risk of deploying and operating the application on a platform. The risk exposure for mainframe hosted applications is much smaller than the other options. It's about 1/6 of the risk for non-mainframe platforms. Now, Solitaire calculates general risk profiles in an actuarial-based metric. We look at deployment and operation of the application, and we build that metric from extensive experiential data. We look at multi-source data. We look at the chance of component failure, the chance of budget or time frame overrun, and the potential exposure of those overruns. The mainframe provides a fair amount of risk mitigation in this area because it has very high resiliency as an infrastructure, and it has an increased ability to allocate resources in a manner that doesn't require human intervention. Overall, if we're looking at lower risk, we're looking at better customer experience. Solitaire also evaluates applications based on a security exposure profile. And the security exposure profile for the mainframe hosted application is 1/17 that for all other platforms. Again, it's an actuarial based metric. It's built out of things that have happened as opposed to theory, benchmarks, etc. We're looking here at a percentage chance of successful incursion. We're also adding to that the percentage impact to assets. What is the scope of impact on data, intellectual property, and market service or operations? And we also look at the size of the financial impact, expressed as a percentage of overall gross annual revenue for the organization. And those can be generally grouped into financial impact due to recovery, remediation, trust and confidence rebuilding, and market share loss. There's a significant difference for the mainframe due to its very small exposure to security breaches. All of these metrics that we've talked about go together into the Solitaire quality of service metric. This is a reflective metric, and we can see that the lower value on the alternate platforms shows that the mainframe quality of service is 11.89 times better than the competitive platforms. So these quality metric components include the customer experience feedback we talked about, the response time shortfall, consistency, application unavailability, security exposure profiles, and risk profiles. This reflective form is an aggregate rating and sort of sums up what customer experience is and what quality is for a specific platform. Overall, we have some really quick summaries that we would talk about here. From a customer satisfaction end user experience, the mainframe's overall customer satisfaction rating is a major advantage. It's the highest satisfaction profile of any platform. Response time is up to 2.8 times faster. That means that the mainframe hosted applications deliver faster services. Availability on the mainframe is higher, and they're significantly different from the other infrastructures. The risk profile for the mainframe is less than 1/6 that of any other platform. Consistency. Mainframe's more consistent. It's more resilient. It delivers more consistent. And security. In all of our examination on this study, mainframe platforms had only 3 reported incidences of successful security incursions, with damages that are less than 0.0001% of the other platforms in 2014. So for the safest platform for data processing, the customers would say, pick a mainframe. I hope this focus on mainframe has been useful for you when looking at customer experience. We are planning on 2 other webinars, one that focuses on x86 and one that focuses on Unix type infrastructures over the next month. Thank you very much for your attention, and this has been a Solitaire Interglobal webinar where expert services plus chaos mathematics equals predictive performance modeling.